So Carney's been on that since day one. He's understood exactly what he's dealing with in dealing with Trump. The advantage of Mark Carney, of course, is his deep experience on the world stage. When he walks into a room, well, everybody knows him. And he's given a lot of attention every time he speaks.
Mark Carney's upcoming trip to China isn't about diplomacy. It's about changing the balance of power. After years of tariffs, threats, and even talk of annexation, Canada is no longer responding to Donald Trump emotionally or defensively. It is responding strategically by targeting the one thing Trump cares about most: economic leverage. And this China visit is where that leverage becomes real. For a long time, Canada-China relations were effectively frozen. Political trust collapsed. Trade relations deteriorated. Dialogue stalled. So this trip does not happen unless something fundamental has changed. What changed is Canada's assessment of risk. Under Donald Trump, Canada learned that dependence on a single economic partner is not just inefficient. It is dangerous. Tariffs on Canadian autos, pressure on agriculture, and unpredictable threats that move markets overnight pushed Ottawa to a breaking point. Canada reached a moment where absorbing that pressure quietly was no longer viable, so Carney adjusted the strategy.
There is so much going on across Canada and across the world, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk to you about today. And I want to start with Mark Carney heading to China next week. What is the significance of that meeting with the Chinese president?
Well, this is the culmination of 6 months of hard work by Carney looking to establish better trading relationships outside of our US Canada trading relationship, which is, of course, the biggest one we have, but it's fraught right now. Trump has been going after us with tariffs, hurting our economy intentionally. He's also said that the renegotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico trade deal is anything but a done deal in advance. So we have to start doing exactly what Carney's been doing, talking to the Europeans, going to Great Britain, talking to markets, saying we've got a lot of big infrastructure projects coming in Canada, get on board. Talking with Danielle Smith of Alberta, saying, no, we're going to really be able to use our natural resources, but we're going to do it responsibly.
At the heart of this China visit is a simple but uncomfortable realization in Ottawa. Canada allowed itself to become too exposed. For decades, that exposure felt safe. The U.S. market was stable, predictable, and rules-based. But under Donald Trump, that assumption collapsed. Trade became conditional. Tariffs became political weapons, and economic dependence turned into vulnerability. Carney's response to that reality is not confrontation. It is structural change. This trip to China is about rebalancing Canada's economic posture so that no single country, no matter how powerful, can apply pressure without consequences. It is about restoring symmetry to relationships that had become one-sided. And crucially, this is not about replacing the United States with China. It is about making sure the United States is no longer the only option. When Canada has multiple large markets open to it, Europe, Asia, and North America, pressure from any one direction loses its bite. Threats become noise. Tariffs become negotiable. That is the strategic logic driving this visit. Carney isn't chasing approval. He's redesigning Canada's leverage. This is where the China visit stops being abstract and becomes concrete. Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles was never imposed because Canada feared Chinese EVs. It was imposed to stay aligned with U.S. policy, and that alignment came at a cost. Canadian consumers paid more, competition was restricted, and Canada still got hit with tariffs anyway. At that point, the question became unavoidable. Why absorb economic pain to please an administration that offers no protection in return? If Canada reconsiders EV tariffs, the consequences are immediate. Chinese EVs enter the Canadian market, prices drop, competition increases, but the real impact is not in Canada. It is south of the border.
There's a lot of work that can be done between Canada and China. One of the things I'll be watching, Will, is whether or not we remove the 100% tariffs that we slapped on Chinese electric vehicles to please the Americans. Pleasing the Americans got us precisely nothing, except the fact that we have to pay twice as much for an electric vehicle in Canada, then neither of them are made here. And why would we continue to please the Americans? Because all that got us was a lot of grief. It got us huge tariffs on Canadian canola and other products. We've hurt our agricultural sector to please the Americans. I think that that's the type of thing that Carney should be correcting in quick order.
Yeah, and and again, the significance of that not meeting with the Chinese president in the last 8 years. So Mark Carney,
Yes.
obviously on top of it.
Chinese EVs in Canada don't stop at Canada. They sit right next to the U.S. market. That alone undercuts Trump's entire tariff-based strategy, which depends on controlling access and isolating competitors. Canada doesn't need to confront Trump directly. It simply needs to make his economic wall irrelevant. That isn't retaliation. That is pressure, and pressure forces recalculation. Trade policy always creates winners and losers, but the current imbalance has been especially punishing for Canada. Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola have hit farmers hard, not because of market failure, but because of politics. Entire sectors were caught in the crossfire of deteriorating diplomatic relations, with little recourse and no alternative markets large enough to absorb the shock. At the same time, Canada's auto industry has been absorbing damage from U.S. tariffs despite years of alignment and cooperation. Plants faced uncertainty, investment slowed, and workers paid the price. This is the context in which the China visit matters. If Canada can restore access for its agricultural exports while opening room for trade-offs in electric vehicles, the equation shifts dramatically. It is no longer about unilateral sacrifice. It becomes a negotiated exchange. Canadian farmers regain a critical export market. Consumers benefit from increased competition. Manufacturers gain flexibility in their supply chains. And Canada regains agency. This is not about ideological alignment or political signaling. It is about using trade policy as a tool, not a punishment Canada quietly absorbs. For the first time in years, Canada is not reacting to tariffs. It is reshaping the terms under which tariffs even matter. Going to China and working with the Chinese does not mean agreeing with everything China does. That is not how the world works, and it is not how trade works. It means sitting down and making the kind of deals that lead to greater exports, stronger leverage, and a more balanced economic future for Canada.
Over the weekend that Canada was going to suffer because of Trump's invasion of Venezuela. This just in, nothing's been repaired or improved in Venezuela. The Chinese were getting about 2/3 of the oil that came out of Venezuela. They're going to be looking for other sources, and Canada could easily be that source. So there is opportunity.
Trump is still the central figure in this story, but not in the way he was before. His record is consistent. He applies pressure where he senses dependence, and he escalates when he believes the cost will be absorbed by others. That approach only works when targets lack alternatives. Carney's strategy is designed to remove that condition entirely. When Canada deepens economic ties beyond the United States, especially with countries Trump sees as competitors, every aggressive move toward Canada carries unintended consequences. A tariff on Canada risks pushing trade toward China. Pressure on autos strengthens alternative supply chains. Threats accelerate diversification. In other words, the harder Trump pushes, the less leverage he has. That is the quiet shift happening here. Carney is not issuing warnings. He is changing the incentive structure. And once incentives change, behavior follows. This is why the China visit matters so much in Washington, even if it is never acknowledged publicly, because it signals that Canada has reached a point where intimidation no longer works and pressure produces resistance rather than compliance. That is not confrontation. That is strategy. And this strategy only works if the person executing it is taken seriously. Carney is. He understands markets, he understands trade-offs, he understands that credibility matters more than noise. That is why this visit is a state visit, not a courtesy stop, and why it is being watched closely, not just in Beijing, but in Washington. This is the deeper shift happening under Carney. Canada is no longer relying on goodwill. It is building interlocking economic relationships that make pressure ineffective. Europe stabilizes security. China expands trade options. Energy anchors reliability. Each layer reduces vulnerability, and together they send a message Trump understands instinctively. Canada is no longer an easy target. This video is not about China alone. It is about Canada entering a new phase of statecraft, not reactive, not emotional, not loud, but precise. Trump's tariffs and threats forced Canada to evolve. Carney's China visit shows how far that evolution has gone, because when a country builds enough options, threats stop working. And right now, Mark Carney is making sure Donald Trump has to think twice before every move. This is Canada Today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.